The world's security situation is changing, and faster than we may realize. We have reached the end of a period of economic growth and stability that is unrivaled in human history. At the end of the Second World War, the U.S. had ascended to the position of the new global leader, while all other major powers lay in physical and financial ruin. As the leader, the U.S. established new security and financial institutions like NATO, the United Nations, and the International Monetary Fund to restructure the world based on American philosophical values. New rules were created and normalized, rules about trade, finance, and military action. These rules were projected and enforced around the world by a country which now possessed a staggering amount of alliances and military power. For over 40 years, another empire antagonized this order at every opportunity, working from a different set of values and core ideology, trading among its own bloc, and plotting with ideological allies to undermine U.S. power worldwide. But economic weaknesses of the communist system left the Soviet Union unstable, and in 1991, it was all over. The constituent countries had broken free on a wave of pro-democracy movements, and a tired and financially strained Moscow lacked the ability and will to stop them. The decline of Russia to a basket case country left the United States as the world's sole superpower, able to act around the world along with its rich allies and minimal resistance. In the years since the Second World War, the U.S. has been involved in many wars and actions that other countries consider hypocritical of the values it claims to be upholding, invading sovereign countries, overthrowing democratically elected governments, and supporting dictators when it suited its agenda. Anyone who refused to play by America's rules was painted as a madman threatening world peace and in need of regime change. Despite this game the U.S. has played, it is the reason that the post-World War II era has been the most peaceful and economically successful period in human history. Major powers don't fight each other like they did before. The major reason is that American power in the fields of diplomacy, trade, and finance is so overwhelming that the U.S. could bring a country to its knees without firing a shot. An example of this was the Suez Crisis of 1956. Egypt nationalized the Anglo-French-owned Suez Canal. Britain and France responded by conspiring with Israel to create a pretext to invade the country, retake the canal, and overthrow the government. The Americans, unapproving of this course of action and worried about the wider implications in the region, waged financial war on its NATO ally Britain to force it to withdraw. Facing a multitude of problems that would cripple its economy, Britain complied with the U.S. and withdrew. Its prime minister was forced to resign, and it never acted internationally independent of the U.S. again. Countries came to understand that fighting against the American system was a fool's game. In large part because of the U.S.-led order of free trade, China has risen from an economic dwarf to the world's second-largest economy, with an economy 4.5 times the size of its closest competitor, Japan, and quickly catching up to the U.S. Now that China has the economic and military power to challenge the United States, it has been increasingly voicing its opinions about the U.S. being an overbearing global policeman who only upholds rules that benefit them under the guise of spreading democracy and freedom. To the leaders in China who have a different ideology than the West, they look out into the Pacific Ocean full of U.S. military bases and its wider influence around the globe. And to them, this feels like a modern version of colonialism. They view America as an empire that has gone unchallenged since 1945, that believes whatever it decides is morally superior, and anyone who opposes their agenda is an evil actor who needs to be isolated. An America that has become increasingly aggressive towards China and has shifted its focus to the Pacific Ocean. China realized that in order to work against the American-led system, you have to have a system of your own. Being a part of the U.S. system often comes with strings attached, like freedom of the press, working towards democracy, human rights, things not entirely compatible with the world's authoritarian leaders. So China began to offer a new way for other countries. Everything would be transactional, and the internal politics of the country would be none of China's business. Unlike in previous decades, China now has the economic and military power to make this happen. So now you see the rivalry between these two superpowers, but what makes this even more complicated is that their two economies are deeply intertwined. Going to war with each other would have devastating economic consequences on both sides. In anticipation of this, they've begun a slow decoupling. The U.S. is trying to reshore manufacturing to the United States and reorganize supply chains to minimize their exposure to China. It has also introduced export restrictions designed to inhibit China's ability to manufacture advanced semiconductors. Around the world, China has been using state money to fund infrastructure projects. This gives China a foothold in new countries and tangles them up in Chinese debt, which it translates to leverage when the time is right. In early 2023, China sent diplomats to the Middle East to mediate in a long-running feud between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Remarkably, they achieved a breakthrough and diplomatic relations between the two countries were restored. This was something the U.S. could not achieve. It was indicative of the waning influence the U.S. has in the region. However, the U.S. remains number one for now, and they will continue to do so as long as they control the economic and financial system that the world runs on. China is challenging this, working opportunistically with countries also opposed to the American-led system, like Russia. After Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, China massively increased its imports of Russian oil at great discount on the internationally traded price. At a summit with Xi Jinping in Moscow in March 2023, Vladimir Putin said he had discussed using the Chinese yuan to settle international payments between Russia and the countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Any trade that isn't conducted in U.S. dollars would be beyond the reach of U.S. sanctions. India has joined in on the idea of moving away from U.S. dollar-facilitated international trade. It also has drastically increased imports of Russian oil and has been looking for almost any currency except the U.S. dollar to pay for it. One of the major reasons everyone has to play nice with the U.S. is the dominance of the U.S. dollar in international trade. This gives the U.S. the ability to unilaterally sanction countries. As more countries trade in currencies other than the U.S. dollar, this power unique to the United States begins to weaken. Russia's attack on Ukraine in 2022 was a major wake-up call for the Western Security Alliance. It also gave us a good idea on which side countries will take. Western countries like the NATO alliance, Japan, and Australia surprised even each other with their resolve and swiftness to act against Russia. Solidifying the Western Bloc, China sided with Russia before the conflict had started, each side declaring their friendship without limits 3 weeks before the invasion began. But most countries are unaligned, unwilling to take sides. They seek to play both sides against each other in order to secure favorable deals for themselves. The best example of this is India taking in huge amounts of Russian oil at a great discount, which has gone a long way to fund the Russian war machine, but has received almost no blowback from the U.S. and its allies. The U.S. doesn't want to upset the Indians, as they need them as part of the Quad alliance aimed at China. In Asia, the U.S. is strengthening its military alliances and increasing the number of bases in the region. The Philippines recently granted the U.S. access to 4 bases in country, after years of deteriorating relations with China. Japan is increasing defense spending to levels not seen post-World War II as it grows fearful of Chinese military power. Even countries as far away as Britain have become involved in the region, signing the AUKUS Pact with Australia and the United States in September 2021 to work together to provide nuclear-powered submarines to Australia as it begins to feel threatened by Chinese military activity. The United States has also stepped up its sales of military equipment to Taiwan in order to deter an attack on the country. Given the proximity to China and China's long-held ambitions to reunify the island with the mainland, should war break out, it is almost certain to be the first target of Chinese aggression. But it is unlikely it would be the last. China's minimum ambition is to push the U.S. out of East Asia. But with the security guarantees the U.S. has given to allies in the region, it cannot allow this to happen, or America's position as world leader and security guarantor will be irrevocably undermined. There is no doubt that we are now in the early stages of a new Cold War. Russia's struggles in Ukraine and the unity of the Western Bloc against them have served to cause a rethink in Beijing, but their determination to break free of the American system remains. Let's hope the war remains cold, as the one that turns hot could be the last.